Hello, good morning, and welcome to Nature Live Online from the Natural History Museum. I'm Khalil Thirlaway. While the museum's doors may have finally reopened to visitors, we still want to make sure the museum is as safe as possible for everyone. So for the time being, we'll still be hosting these shows online rather than in our studio at the museum. We've put in a load of measures to make sure you can have a fun and safe time at the museum, and you can find out all the information on our website. Now, before we start the show, a little bit of context for this one. We're running an exciting project funded by the Natural Environment Research Council called Nature in Lockdown, A Breath of Fresh Air. And we want to hear from you. The past few months of lockdown have confined most of us to our homes. Pubs and restaurants closed for a lot of the time, and public transport's stopping for a while, and generally fewer humans out and about. And we want to know about how this has affected our relationship with nature and the world around us. We've put on a couple of shows exploring this topic, and we'd love to know what you think. So you can visit our website and click on the Anthropocene tab to take part in a quick 3-question survey to let us know if you found our shows interesting. And for those of you watching on YouTube, there should be a link in the comments section coming up soon. So today, we're going to be finding out about how scientists and the public collaborate in community science projects, especially those looking at monitoring wildlife, and how this has changed during lockdown. To give us some insight, I've got 2 guests today, actually. Victoria Burton from the Natural History Museum and Jordan Cuff from Cardiff University. Hi both, thanks for joining us.
Hello, lovely to see you.
And we'd love to hear from you guys at home as well, so if you've got any questions today, please do pop them in the comments section and we'll try and answer as many as we can in the time we've got. So before we get into the meat of our discussion, let's just start off with a little introduction on who you guys are and what you do. So let's start with you, Victoria.
Yeah, I'm an ecologist at the Natural History Museum, so that means I'm interested in how living things interact with each other and their environment, and also with human impacts. And my research is mostly on soil biodiversity, so animals and fungi that live in the soil, especially earthworms, and how human activities such as farming, or forestry, or urbanisation affect these animals. I particularly like involving the community and ordinary people with my research through citizen science.
And I guess, working in that kind of ecology of the soil is such a fundamental thing to almost all of the environment around us, because that's where nutrients get cycled, it's where plants come from, and it's where the basis of a lot of food webs are.
Yes, it's literally the basis of most ecosystems, and terrestrial ones at least, and but generally understudied because it's hard to get to, it's under your feet, you don't always notice it. So yeah, that's why my research has been focused on soil in particular.
Getting more people looking down.
Yeah.
Jordan, what about you?
Hello, I'm Jordan Cuff. I'm actually in the final stages of my PhD in Cardiff University, in which I've basically been looking at what spiders eat in farms and how that can help us protect our crops from pests like aphids and thrips and things like that. But during the lockdown, I've been working with the British Ecological Society on some surveys to basically help people monitor the spiders in and around their homes.
Well, we'll be getting to all of those interesting projects from both of you in a sec. So we'll start off with Victoria. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about your work now that we've got that kind of opening baseline?
Yeah, so part of my work involves I'm often involved in doing my own voluntary work. This is me finding a bee orchid very excitingly during lockdown on a plant survey.
Where is the bee orchid?
I do as a volunteer. It's just, you can just about see the white petals there. They're quite small. I was very excited to find it. This was right during lockdown, so I was working from home, but I did manage to get out and about and doing a survey for the National Plant Monitoring Scheme, which is helping to find out more about plants in the UK and how they're changing. So I do this as a volunteer, and it was just lovely to get out and about and see some plants and do a bit of field work, which I hadn't been able to do so much since the museum's been closed.
Yeah, I guess as an ecologist, a big part of your work must be kind of getting out of the lab and the office and into the environment to actually get data and look at the relationships between these organisms.
Yes, yeah, I love getting outside and having a look at organisms in their environment and recording. It does involve some lab work as well. So usually I'd go back to the museum where I've got my microscope and my books, and I'd be identifying the things I've been found. Unfortunately, I still don't have access to that at the moment, so I've had to improvise and set up my own little lab in my living room with a little USB microscope, and trying to do what I can and still carry on with my research from home.
It's amazing seeing how, and I've seen this with a couple of so many of you have essentially set up mini home labs to make sure that your work keeps going. And have you always been this kind of passionate about looking at the way organisms interact?
Yes, for as long as I can remember, I've liked going outside and looking at the environment. I've been very privileged that I had parents who allowed me to wander around the woods and more or less entertain myself. And as part of that, I used to take nature diaries and record what I see, observe. And I still got them as an example on the screen of one I made when I was 12. And that's really stuck with me. But I think part of that stayed with me in the way I like to work. I'm really keen to involve everyone in science, because we all live in this world, and I think everyone should be involved in having a say on what science is done, and everyone should have the chance to get involved with that. And I'd like to keep that through my work. And so part of my PhD, I ran a program called Earthworm Watch, which was asking people around the country to dig up earthworms in their gardens or their local green space to try and find more about earthworms in urban areas.
And so, how does that feed into your work now?
So I'm based in the now in the Angela Marmont Centre for UK Biodiversity. So that's home to the Identification Advisory Service. So you can submit your life or actual fossils and rocks as well for identification, and also does a lot of citizen science projects and other kind of biological monitoring with volunteers throughout the UK. And as part of that, usually we'd be doing quite a lot of events called Bioblitzes. So they're usually a set period of time where people will go out and try and find as many different species as possible. They vary quite a bit from kind of mostly public engagement type ones, where a lot of young people, or maybe people finding out about nature for the first time, so doing pond dipping or bug hunts, to more kind of expert-led ones where people will go out and collect specimens and identify and then build up a list of species for that particular area.
And we're seeing a lot of these pictures of close proximity, not wearing masks and stuff. So obviously these photos were taken before lockdown. So how has the Bioblitz and Family Festival activities that you do, how have they changed since the thing happened?
Yeah, so we've not been able to do these kind of very close together type and Bioblitzes events. So we've been trying to adapt and move to maybe online ways of working. Part of our family festival, we ran a plant club Bioblitz. So I wanted to, I think one of the things I've noticed with lockdown is that the councils weren't doing so much maintenance, and there was some more what people might call weeds, but I like to call wildflowers and plants growing up. And I wanted kind of people to kind of see slightly differently. So they're not just weeds and neglect, but they, their biodiversity, their homes for animals and plants in urban areas, which is often important. Nature is not just out in the countryside. So this is my parents' weedy alleyway, which I actually recorded 20 different species of plants from just in this little area. And we had asked people to go out and see what was in their local area and then submit their photographs. And we could help them identify them and find out what they had growing near them. And we had some success with that. That was just purely done through a platform called iNaturalist. But we did miss this kind of one-to-one interactions with scientists. So we're thinking about ways that we can maybe recreate that in a kind of virtual environment and kind of a blended Bioblitz in the future, perhaps.
And this actually feeds in quite nicely to a question we've had from one of our viewers on Facebook. Noah is asking whether any new species of plant have been discovered during lockdown that you know of.
Oh, not that I know of, but I don't know if there's any actual kind of new to science, as we say, plants, but there's certainly, I expect there's a lot of changes in plant communities in urban areas in particular. And I know there's a couple of species which were quite rare a while back and now have been increasing, whether that's due to climate change or maybe how we use our urban spaces, changes in pollution perhaps. But I don't think there's any kind of new ones being discovered as far as I know during lockdown.
But I guess as an ecologist, you look at the relationships between species and how their populations change and stuff over time. So, the new to science species is not the only exciting measurement that you can have. I was talking to a botanist from the north of England a couple of weeks ago who is working on a peatland restoration project. So to get all the peat bogs restored to their former richness so that all the formerly common but now really rare carnivorous plants can come back and get community there. So yeah, it's really cool to see how these dynamics change over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why it's really the monitoring work that a lot of the general public and volunteers do is really important for seeing how these changes over time and what we can do to change and maybe in your example make the carnivorous plants come back. And
on the subject of things that eat insects, Jordan doesn't eat insects, I don't think, but you study spiders. So how does your work on spider monitoring, how does that kind of interact with the public?
So at the start of the COVID-19 lockdown, I had a great conversation with the British Ecological Society in which we agreed to put forward these incredible spider surveys, basically to help people monitor the spiders in and around their homes. So we basically launched 4 surveys as of last week for all sorts of different species that are found quite commonly in and around in people's homes. So it meant that people could get involved with nature even when they're stuck inside. And the first of these to launch was the cellar spider survey. And you can see on the screen here, we have one of the less common cellar spiders of the UK, the wine cellar spider, Silochorus simoni, munching away on a fruit fly. And this is one of the species that we've actually managed to expand the known distribution of throughout these surveys. In fact, we've found new localities for most of the species we've looked at.
But these spiders, they're called cellar spiders, and this one's particularly called a wine cellar spider, but they're not only found in cellars and wines.
No, so lucky for all the viewers at home who don't have a wine cellar, you can hopefully still find these in your home. So they get their name basically from their original distribution, which is typically in wine cellars. And they were brought over to the UK on wine imports, it's thought, over the last couple of centuries. But you can find them in the corner of your living room or everywhere else you could possibly expect.
I do quite like the fact that this is a picture of a wine cellar spider eating a fruit fly, because wine is made of fruit. I don't know.
Yeah, they're protected goods.
What about some of the other surveys that you've been doing?
So following the cellar spider survey, we launched the garden spiderling survey. So you can see these on screen now. The garden spiders, they truly are. So these are Arenaeus diadematus, and in spring, the eggs will hatch and the spiderlings emerge, and they're these bright yellow balls of joy. And they build these little scaffolds of silk in their garden, and they all cluster together in a ball, and when they're disturbed, they just explode out. So really, really amazing to watch. And we were basically looking at when these spiderlings emerge. And so we got people to send in records from all across the UK. We ended up with about 120 odd records. And we could start to see that actually, as you go further north, they tended to emerge later. Over subsequent years, hopefully we'll get more data to build a really nice analysis of this. But so it's amazing to see that phenology already.
These spider surveys, I guess they perform multiple purposes, because not only are they helping you and the British Ecological Society generate data and get a kind of understanding of, but also they are getting people involved in frontline science, which is really great to democratize. Also, I think maybe for some people it might be a way to bridge that gap between human and spider, because let's be honest, spiders are kind of a Marmite organism. You either love them or you hate them. And there are some people who are not at all comfortable with spiders. So persuading oneself to kind of actually observe them and come to terms with them might be a helpful thing for people.
Absolutely. So I actually used to be an arachnophobe myself. And it's through exposure to spiders that I've learned to love them. And I love them dearly now. So hopefully these surveys, by getting people to look at the spiders in their homes, it'll bridge that gap from house spider to heart. And slowly they'll work their way into people's minds and hearts and compassion. But I mean, it's not just the spiders in and around the home that we've surveyed. We also looked at the nursery web spider, Bezoar mirabilis, which is a spider that's typically found sort of out in taller vegetation. And we managed to find 4 new hectads for this, so 4 new areas of the UK it previously hadn't been found in. But we're specifically looking at its behavior. So the nursery web spider is named after its tendency to build these silken tents in which small clusters of spiderlings will be guarded by their mother. And the mother, before it builds its tent, will be found with these egg sacs that look like big balls of clay. So we were looking at when these egg sacs and these tents are appearing around the UK. And hopefully by the end of this second brood that they're currently in, so they normally reproduce with 2 broods in each year, we can start to see the patterns and the precise timing of these egg sacs and tents.
And we're getting a question from Kim, one of our viewers on YouTube, who's asked, I think this is a really important question, how can we get involved with some of these community science initiatives? And I'm going to get you to answer that first, Jordan, and then Victoria.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the British Arachnological Society surveys, you can very easily get involved by going to the British Arachnological Society website, which is britishspiders.org, or on the Twitter page as well, which is @BritishSpiders. And in both of these places, you can find all of the survey sheets with all of the instructions, all of the information that is needed. So you basically then just need to go out, find these spiders, take a picture, and then either tweet or email the British Arachnological Society with all of the necessary information.
Victoria, how about your kind of initiatives? How can people get involved with those, either now or when things open up a little bit?
Yeah, so the Natural History Museum Citizen Science projects are all on our website, and you can find out a little bit more about them and how to take part in them. But there's lots of other organisations that run them across the country. A good place to look for them is the website SciStarter, which has a lot of different projects on it, and you can filter by one if you want ones to go outside or if you want ones just to do from home. A lot of the online type projects also run by the Zooniverse, which is a great place to go if you just want to spend an evening counting penguins or identifying mammals from cameras and things like that. It's great for insomnia as well, I find.
Yeah, it's something to kind of clear that mind. We're getting loads of comments from people on all platforms about how people have been trying to kind of overcome arachnophobia by getting used to spiders and watching them and becoming closer with them. I myself had a bit of a story. Like when I was a little kid, absolutely loved spiders. I'd play with them in my hands. I'd collect them from around the house. And then when I was, can't remember how old, but way too young, I watched the film Arachnophobia, which was like early 90s, I can't remember, but a pretty B-rate horror film, but it blew my fragile little mind and I became arachnophobic. So later in life, I've had to do exactly what these people are doing and train myself to become okay with them again, because they're really cool organisms and they perform a really vital role in our ecosystem.
Yeah, and what better place to start than the ones that are already in your home?
Exactly. And there's such a diversity of them as well, even just looking around my flat. And we've got a question from Lucy on YouTube, who's asked, so she's got fruit flies everywhere in her house. And what she wants to do is encourage in some spiders to maybe balance things out, get a bit of biocontrol in there. Any suggestions on how she can lure some spiders into the house?
It's a very good question. I would say the first and foremost thing to do really is just not remove them when they're there. It seems quite obvious, but I think a lot of people will. And then the other thing is, I think particularly when people are dusting, they tend to clear away webs and all these little hidey holes. So just maybe when you're doing a spring clean, just be cautious of your little friend in the corner.
Excellent. Yeah, I guess because there is this kind of association of you see a spider web and you think, oh, cobwebs, this place must be filthy. Whereas actually, sometimes you need a bit of biodiversity in the house. So now that we've touched on the kind of the specific work and projects that you guys are involved in, I'd quite like us to have a little bit of a chat, a bit more broadly about kind of community science and wildlife monitoring, a bit more broadly, because it's a really important aspect of how people interact with science. For example, in the pictures that we showed of Victoria, your projects, the people involved in, a lot of the members of the public involved in those projects were clearly kids. And so I guess for some people, this must be their first experience of actual science research rather than just kind of science lessons at school.
Yeah, I'm particularly keen on involving children in research because it is often a disconnect between the type of science you learn at school, which I never actually enjoyed as a child, and kind of research which you really do, which is often a lot more different types of science. I mean, the field work that I do and Jordan does, but also a lot of different types of people involved. It's a team game. There are administrators, there are lab workers, as well as your professors, and I like that you can actually involve young people in real scientific research and not just the sort of the demonstrations and things that you might do in a classroom, and maybe have a kind of more real understanding of what scientists actually do.
And I guess you get a more real understanding of who scientists are, because
Yes.
by interacting with current researchers, whereas a lot of the time at school, the scientists that you learn about will be historical figures. And because of social situations in history, it's mostly old rich white guys with big mutton chops. And that doesn't reflect the scientific community today.
No, there's a lot more diversity than kind of the image of a middle-class white man with a beard on their own doing science. It's a much more of a team game. We need lots of different types of people with lots of different types of skills, and we need to encourage more people who have different backgrounds to get involved in that. So I like to hope that citizen science is one of the ways that we can do that.
Jordan, actually, we've had another question from Noah, which is a really fascinating one. And I think he's picked up on the fact that you study spider diets, because he's asking whether there are any vegetarian spiders, and if so, what do they eat?
There actually are. It's a little known fact, and I think something that's come to light quite recently. But there are spiders across the world that sometimes feed on things like the nectar reserves in flowers. So some of them actually use their palps, which are like their mouth parts, to squeeze the nectar out and drink that. Some spiders have even been seen drinking honeydew, which is the sugary water that comes out of aphids. So these spiders will feed on these sort of vegetative resources, and sometimes they'll supplement their diet of flies and other spiders by feeding on these little snacks in between. And it's something that I think a lot of researchers shied away from so far.
It's really interesting to see that there are spiders that are, standing next to an aphid, which would normally be a really common prey item, and instead of eating it, they're kind of they're eating the honeydew, which is kind of like standing next to a cow and milking it rather than making a burger out of it.
Yeah, very true. I suppose in some ways there's less risk involved with eating something that doesn't kick you in the face when you try to bite it.
But do they ever come into conflict with ants? Because quite often you get ants kind of guarding and milking aphids.
Yeah, so there are definitely conflicts between ants and spiders, but there are also sort of collaborations in a sense. So you get ant mimicking spiders that will go into the nests of ants, so probably less collaborative and more sneaky and surreptitious, but they'll then effectively use that as a resource.
Sorry, going back into our broader discussion, I just felt like I had to ask that question about vegetarian spiders. You work in the soil and in spiders respectively, but there are broader community science initiatives out there, right? So I heard about one from the British Trust for Ornithology, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So they've launched their own sort of garden bird watch surveys every year for as long as I can remember, actually. I think it's since the mid-90s. And this year they made it free to sign up. So you have all of these people stuck at home thinking what to do, and they see a blue tit out the window. So now they can get involved in this incredible scheme to record Britain's garden birds.
And I guess, if you're spending time looking out the window and looking at birds and stuff like that, you're not just going to see birds. You're going to see all sorts of other species and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why it's great to have a variety of different survey strategies on. And as Victoria mentioned with plant surveys and earthworms and everything else, that there is basically a plethora of surveys available for most taxa.
And on the subject of trying to observe nature from home, people's access to kind of green open spaces and things like that, it varies massively across the country. So there might be some people who live out in the countryside, have a forest in their back garden, other people who live, at the top of a block of flats in the middle of a city, and they don't have a garden. They might not have a park nearby. Victoria, do you have any ideas on how people who might not have obvious open access to nature could still get involved in wildlife monitoring?
Yeah, I mean, one of the amazing things about nature, I mean, it's not just out in the countryside or in nature reserves. It is really all around you. I mean, even in the kind of most concrete area, there are lichens and mosses living on the building, and within them there'd be tiny mites and springtails and things feeding on those. So it's kind of trying to think a little bit kind of differently, maybe looking a bit closer, taking some time to watch and see what's in your area. Maybe as with Jordan's surveys, you don't even need to leave your home at all. There could be a whole little ecosystem just in your house.
Yeah, well, my upstairs neighbor is doing some renovations at the moment, and I don't really, I have a chimney, I have a fireplace, it doesn't work, but I've seen a whole ecosystem come down there in the past few days. It's been interesting, if a little unsettling.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that you can always record things like that, no matter if there's a survey on or not. And apps like iRecord, which also has a website as well, you can use that to basically log where and when you find things. And at the moment, we're in Cardiff University, we're coming up with a biodiversity action plan. And part of the initiative to do that has involved monitoring the wildlife that's already present. So to do that during lockdown is very difficult without a student army of volunteers ready to go out and look for things. So instead, we've looked at the historical records on iRecord, and we've started to build a sort of past and present distribution of the species on campus. And that's all through records submitted by just people walking in the park.
I guess back in the day, we had little nature journals like we saw Victoria's from her childhood. Now we have things like iRecord, which I guess allows you to collate all that data from all these people and over time as well. So you're not just seeing a snapshot of what is happening right now. You can see how those trends are changing over time and whether species are becoming more or less abundant and where they are in the country. And I guess that gives you a much more complete pattern of looking at things.
Yeah, we're really fortunate in the UK. We've got a long history of recording by volunteers, and actually a lot of this data recorded, it goes towards monitoring kind of the health of our ecosystem. So the State of Nature report, a lot of that data is not by scientists sort of employed by museums or universities. It's just ordinary volunteers going out and recording the birds and the butterflies they see. And so whatever small piece of observation, a data point you can put into that can help towards that.
And in terms of gathering data and using the public for that, there's also a kind of another aspect of it where I've heard people have been using the members of the public to help analyze like satellite footage, microscope images, drone footage. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, Jordan?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are initiatives all over the world getting people to look through images and data from their homes to try and get involved in science, basically helping the scientists work in a condition that they're not used to, which is outside of a lab, outside of an office environment. And there's a particular example in Central America where they have all this drone footage of I think it's spider monkeys. So it's a very different kind of spider survey, in which they're using these infrared images to track how many monkeys are in these tree canopies. And they can then use the data collected by people to help build machine learning algorithms to then automate it in the future. So there's an awful lot people can do from home to help science.
So it's basically using the computing power of the public to help train an AI that would then be able to do that work automatically.
I believe so, yeah, which basically just makes us one big supercomputer, as you say.
I love that idea of humanity as a big supercomputer doing all these different calculations together. Because they used that kind of approach for like astronomical data and genetic data and like protein folding puzzles as well. It's amazing the types of things that that kind of that collective human thinking can accomplish.
Absolutely.
So we've had another question from one of our viewers on YouTube asking, again, this is another spider diet question. People are going crazy for the spider diets. How many different types of crop pests or agricultural pests or garden pests do spiders eat? They've mentioned aphids and thrips, but I don't even know what a thrip is.
So a thrips is basically a very small insect with these feathery wings, and they're typically known as pests, although there are some that are predators and they perform all sorts of ecological functions. But they're very, very small, so very underappreciated. And they actually, in my research, comprise one of the main components of the diet of these spiders inhabiting farmland. Although my PhD was very much geared toward the predation of aphids, it's one of the most prominent crop pests in farming systems in Europe, at least. But they do tend to eat all sorts of other pests, like leaf hoppers as well, and all sorts of different flies that do crop damage. They're definitely providing a very valuable role. Particularly the juvenile spiders eat the pests, whereas the adults tend to eat more of one another.
Well, I guess also the juvenile spiders are going to be the ones that are kind of hungriest. They're going to be the ones that are trying to eat to grow. And then once you're big enough, you can take on the other spiders.
Yeah. I mean, a little baby spider isn't going to be able to tackle its uncle from down the road. I think it's going to go for the defenseless little thrips sat on a leaf.
Is this kind of is this cannibalism of the same species, or is it other spider species that they'll prey on? Or
it's a very good question, and one that I'm afraid I actually can't answer. So the methodology I use uses genetics, and we can't actually differentiate between the DNA of the spider that we're looking at and spiders of the same species. So instead, we can only tell when the spider's eating other spiders of other species, which they do tend to do quite a lot.
Fascinating. There's so much I want to ask about spider diets, but this is not a show about spider diets.
Of course, yeah.
So going back to the kind of getting the collective computing power of people. Can you guys think of any other kind of ecological questions that could be like really well investigated using this kind of community science, almost cloud computing kind of method? Victoria, the soil is a really complex biome. Is there anything we could use the public for in that?
Yeah, one of the things the museum has used in the past, and hopefully will do a lot more in the future, is trying to digitize all the amazing kind of hundreds of thousands of specimens that we have. So plant specimens, insect specimens. Often we don't have kind of the data matched up with them. So we need people to go through and read and transcribe all those little labels and map where they were on the world. And this sort of online citizen science is a really good method of doing this, because it helps kind of spread out that workload around people, and also gets people to have a look at some of the amazing specimens that not many people can see in person, because they're often fragile and away and can't be taken out too much.
And these collections are, they might seem like, oh, they're just, but they're a really important scientific resource. We can use them to.
Yes, I mean, often they're linked to the past. So we have the actual specimens collected 100 years ago, say, and we can use those in lots of different ways, and in ways that people who collected them never had kind of any idea how we could. So we can look at how they're changing distributions over time, but we can even look at their DNA and see how maybe their populations have changed, if their genes have got kind of more contracted or not, or if they're related to the ones we have today, or have another population migrated from somewhere else. So there's lots of amazing things we can do using these, and connecting that up with what we find out today as well, linked between past and present.
Talking about changes over time, we've had a couple of questions about weather and climate. So Alina on Facebook has asked whether the kind of warming climate and environmental change is affecting, she asked particularly spiders, but I'm going to ask both of you that question, whether it's changing the ecology of spiders or the soil. So Jordan, I'll send that to you first.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So as the climate warms, we're likely to see an expansion of the range of many species going toward the north. And in fact, this is something that hopefully these BAS surveys will detect, these spider surveys. So over subsequent years, we may see these spiders appearing further and further north. But to really understand how that sort of density of spiders changes, we need to have a more quantitative survey approach. So the most recent survey that the British Ecological Society have launched is actually a density one, where we're looking at how many garden spiders are found in a specific area.
I mean, looking out into my very small southwest London garden, I can see 3 or 4 garden spiders. So I'll be filling out that survey later today.
Amazing. Yeah, you can tell them apart from other orb weavers because they have this white cross on their abdomen, which is why they're also called the cross spider sometimes. But I think that makes them sound angry, so I tend to go with garden spider.
It's hard to tell what emotion a spider's feeling. It's got 8 eyes. How many eyebrows has it got? Victoria, is the British soil ecosystem changing?
It's a little bit harder to tell with soil because it's not quite as well studied as a lot of these above ground. So we got quite good information on how plants have changed their flowering time over the last sort of 100 years, and how some insects which used to be extremely rare, like the hornet hoverfly, which is our largest species of hoverfly, Volucella zonaria. For the Victorians, that was a really exciting find. It was sort of maybe once in a lifetime, but now it's quite common in most people's gardens, at least in the south of the country. But the soil is not quite so well studied, so we don't know exactly if it's changing, how it might change, which is a bit of a problem since soil underpins a lot of ecosystems. So that's partly why I'm studying it, to try and find out more, and hopefully we might be able to get some regular earthworm surveying going on to see how they might change. Because earthworms, of course, are quite vulnerable to drying the soils and flooding as well, which are both predicted. So there might be a risk of them declining, which is obviously bad news for a lot of farming, because that often relies on earthworms.
And actually, this follows in quite nicely to a question we've had from Abby, who's asking about keeping a weather diary and whether that could be helpful for community science. So, do you have or do you know of any kind of weather monitoring community science initiatives?
So there's definitely one that springs to my mind, which is basically the Himalayas have been disguised by fog for much of India that would normally have seen them due to pollution and smog and whatnot. And during the COVID-19 lockdown, some of that has begun to clear. So there was basically a sort of community science initiative to monitor the clearance of this air. So people were taking photographs from different places, and by looking at the clarity of the image of the Himalayas, you could start to create a proxy for the clearance of pollution in these areas.
Well, I remember near the beginning of lockdown, walking across Brockwell Park, when we were allowed out, and looking out across all the way into the centre of London. And normally it's kind of it's a smoky haze, but I could see crystal clear most of the way across the city from the top of that hill.
Yeah, I think that really shows the importance of keeping a log of these weather conditions and the sort of visibility and things like that as a proxy for this pollution and weather.
So I think we're starting to come towards the end of the show. So to wrap up, what I'd quite like to get from you guys is a little refresher for our audience and a reminder on how they can get involved in any community science initiatives that you have in mind. and then we'll start to wrap up. Sorry,
Yes,
Victoria, go.
the Natural History Museum's website has a section on citizen science projects and other activities you can take part in from home, or you could have a look at the SciStarter website as well if you want to have a look at other organisations' activities. Actually, one thing I forgot is the Biological Record Centre. So on their website, they have a list of all the different recording schemes in the UK, and there's one for almost every organism you can think of. And they have links there to the various websites and people involved, so you can have a look and see if there's something you're particularly interested in. You can get in touch and see how you can get involved with monitoring that particular group.
Thanks. And Jordan?
So if you want to look at spiders in or around your home or even out in nature, you can basically just go to the britishspiders.org website, which is the British Ornithological Society website, and they have all the survey sheets with all the information you need, or go to @BritishSpiders on Twitter, and everything you need is there. But if you don't fancy doing spiders first, or maybe you need a break from all the spider surveying you're going to do, then obviously just record anything you like. Just go out in nature, have a go at identifying something, and there are always people and resources on hand to help you with that, and then record it all via iRecord or anything similar, and you'll be doing a great service to science.
Thank you so much, guys. I've really enjoyed this discussion, and I'm probably going to go outside and survey some wildlife now. Take a look inside the office. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us. This has been great.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to go and record all those spiders that are in my corners of my rooms now.
Yeah, absolutely me too. Thank you for joining us at home as well today. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Please do head over to our website, by the way, and fill out that survey on the Anthropocene page, just so that we know what you've thought about all our Anthropocene and nature in lockdown related programming. And do join us again for more Nature Live shows at 12 on Tuesdays and 10:30 on Fridays. Keep an eye on our social channels. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, as well as nhm.ac.uk. Until next time, that was Victoria Burton and Jordan Cuff. I'm Khalil Thirlaway, and this has been Nature Live Online. We're really looking forward to seeing you all at the museum again. Goodbye.